The Cascade Range, stretching like a crooked spine along the Pacific Northwest, is where raw nature collides with awe-inspiring beauty. These mountains are not just part of the landscape, they are the landscape, dominating the horizon, shaping weather patterns, and defining entire ecosystems. From the ash-scarred flanks of Mount Saint Helens to the crystalline depths of Crater Lake, the Cascades represent both destruction and renewal, chaos and calm. They are geologic titans, formed by fire and pressure over millions of years, yet they also serve as cultural touchstones, woven into the stories, art, and identities of the people who live in their shadow. Towering over cities and wilderness alike, these mountains have long served as a physical and psychological boundary, splitting Washington, Oregon, and Northern California into east and west, wet and dry, evergreen and desert. But more than anything, they carve open the imagination, beckoning hikers, climbers, skiers, poets, and photographers alike with their magnetic mix of danger and grandeur. Geologically, the Cascades are a direct product of the violent ballet taking place beneath the Pacific Ocean, where the Juan de Fuca Plate grinds its way beneath the North American Plate. This subduction zone, part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, creates the magma that rises to form the volcanoes. Magma that sometimes stays hidden for centuries, sometimes erupts in seconds. That same tectonic dance is also responsible for the region's deep offshore trenches, earthquake hazards, and the thermal energy that bubbles up in hot springs and geysers. The land here is restless by nature. Pull up a topographic map, and the pattern is unmistakable. The volcanoes line up in a jagged row like vertebrae in a fireborne backbone. Each peak tells its own story, rising high above the surrounding terrain like an exclamation point in stone. The high Cascades are the show stealers, a dramatic cast of giants. Mount Rainier, the tallest of them all at 14,411 feet, stands sentinel over Seattle, its icy crown visible on clear days for miles in every direction. Mount Hood looms over Portland with a symmetry that almost feels sculpted, a postcard-perfect pyramid of snow and rock. To the south, Mount Shasta reigns over Northern California, an isolated giant so massive it seems to pull its own weather out of the sky. Mount Adams sits nearby, hulking and slightly withdrawn, less photographed but no less formidable. Glacier Peak hides in plain sight, remote, rugged, and often forgotten. Yet one of the most active volcanoes in the chain. Mount Baker, far to the north, wears its snow like a badge of honor and boasts some of the highest annual snowfall totals on the planet. Then there's Mount Saint Helens, once a textbook stratovolcano with a perfect cone, now an open wound in the earth, its north face blasted away by a cataclysm that shook the entire country. That cataclysm was, of course, the infamous eruption of 1980. On the morning of May 18th, Mount Saint Helens reminded everyone that the Cascades are not sleeping relics, but very much alive. The mountain didn't just erupt, it detonated. A massive landslide, triggered by a magnitude 5.1 earthquake, uncorked the volcano's pressure, unleashing a lateral blast that flattened 230 square miles of forest, killed 57 people, and created one of the most dramatic volcanic landscapes in the modern world. The eruption melted entire glaciers in seconds, sending torrents of mud and debris down river valleys. Rivers were clogged with sediment, lakes were choked with floating logs, and the sky turned black with ash as far away as Oklahoma. The eruption rewrote the local geography and redefined how Americans thought about volcanoes. It also sparked a wave of scientific investment and public awareness. In the decades since, Mount Saint Helens has continued to rumble. Between 2004 and 2008, a new lava dome grew inside the crater, puffing steam and reshaping the caldera once again. Scientists now monitor it with everything from GPS stations to drone flights, hoping to catch the next signs of unrest before it escalates. Mount Saint Helens may be the most famous, but it's far from the only threat in the range. Other peaks, Mount Rainier, Mount Hood, Mount Shasta, haven't erupted in living memory, but they are far from dormant. These volcanoes are classified as active, and their explosive potential is the subject of constant study. The U.S. Geological Survey, working through the Cascades Volcano Observatory, tracks seismic activity, gas emissions, ground deformation, and thermal anomalies at every major peak. Emergency preparedness efforts have improved dramatically since 1980. Mount Rainier, in particular, poses a unique risk, not because of its eruption potential alone, but because of its massive glacial cover. If an eruption, or even a moderate landslide, were to destabilize those glaciers, the resulting lahars, volcanic mud flows, could surge down river valleys with devastating speed and reach populated areas like Orting, Puyallup, and even Tacoma within hours. In response, local governments have installed lahar sirens, created evacuation plans, and drilled communities on what to do when the mountain moves. But back to the mountains themselves, because these peaks deserve more than just a passing mention. The three sisters in Oregon, North Sister, Middle Sister, and South Sister, stand side by side like volcanic siblings, similar in shape but radically different in age, attitude, and temperament. North Sister is the oldest, weathered and crumbling, a jagged mess of ancient lava flows and rotten rock that warns climbers away with its unstable ridgelines and loose talus. Middle Sister, slightly younger, balances ruggedness with approachability, a mountain caught between eras. And South Sister, the most recently active and most frequently visited, still holds glacial ice and attracts thousands of hikers each summer, many of them making their first summit attempt on her forgiving slopes. The trio dominates the Central Oregon skyline and, depending on the light, can seem either serene or savage, familiar or otherworldly. Just to the east, Broken Top looms like a scarred sentinel. Its ragged spires and collapsed crater speak of a volcano past its prime, slowly disintegrating back into the earth. It's a mountaineer's mountain, quiet, unforgiving, and full of sharp angles. Not far away is Mount Jefferson, perhaps the most visually striking of Oregon's volcanoes. Its pyramid-like summit pierces the sky, remote and seldom climbed, partly because of its isolation, and partly because of the technical challenge required to reach its exposed summit ridge. Jefferson sits in a kind of mythic isolation, always visible from a distance, always calling, but rarely approached. And then there's Three-Fingered Jack, an eroded volcanic plug with spiny ridges and sheer faces. Its name is distinctive as its silhouette. It's a fragment of what used to be, a reminder that these mountains are alive but also mortal. Traveling southward, the landscape changes, but the volcanic story continues. Crater Lake is perhaps the most surreal landmark in the Cascades, and it sits inside the caldera left behind when Mount Mazama violently erupted and collapsed over 7,000 years ago. Today, that cataclysm is frozen in time, hidden beneath more than 1,000 feet of still, impossibly blue water. Crater Lake is one of those rare places that doesn't feel real. There are no rivers feeding it, no streams draining it. Just snowfall, evaporation, and clarity so profound it distorts depth and distance. It's both a national park and a spiritual site, sacred to the Klamath tribes, and its silence is as much a part of the experience as the view. Continuing down the volcanic arc, Mount McLaughlin rises with textbook symmetry above the forests of southern Oregon. Its conical shape is unmistakable from almost any direction, a lone sentinel above the pines, often snow-draped well into summer. Though not as famous as Rainier or Hood, McLaughlin commands the skyline of the southern Cascades, and those who summit it are treated to expansive views stretching into northern California. Just east of Bend lies Newberry Volcano, a massive and sprawling shield volcano that doesn't scream for attention the way the more photogenic peaks do. But once you're standing in the middle of its wide caldera, home to the Twin Paulina and East Lakes, it's impossible to ignore. The landscape is a patchwork of obsidian flows, cinder cones, and hot springs, all reminders of the raw volcanic power that shaped the area. It's a playground for geologists and a sanctuary for campers, anglers, and hikers alike. Crossing into California, Medicine Lake Volcano spreads out under the radar, quietly claiming the title of the largest volcano in the Cascades by volume. It doesn't tower over the land, it blends into it, but its eruptions have left behind a broad, rolling terrain of lava fields, lava tubes, and geothermal quirks. Unlike the photogenic peaks to the north, Medicine Lake's mystery lies in its subtlety. It doesn't announce itself, it whispers, and you have to pay attention. Further south still, Lassen Peak stands like a volcano from a dream, rounded, snowy, steaming, and unmistakably alive. It last erupted between 1914 and 1921, making it the most recent Cascades eruption before Mount Saint Helens blew its top. Today, it anchors Lassen Volcanic National Park, a surreal landscape of boiling springs, mud pots, fumaroles, and snow-covered slopes. It's a place where you can hike through forest, cross snowfields, and watch steam rise from the earth, all within a single afternoon. Hikers in the 1990s experienced these mountains with a kind of analog intimacy that's harder to replicate now. Gear was bulkier and often less efficient. steel frame packs, leather boots, foam pads that soaked up water, but there was a simplicity to it. You studied paper maps by headlamp, dialed into weather forecasts on scratchy AM radios, and followed your instincts instead of an app. Trails felt wilder. Wayfinding was an art, not a preloaded GPX file. And while there were fewer people on the trail, there was a stronger sense of solitude and discovery. The wilderness felt like it belonged to those who made the effort to find it. The memories from that era endure. Climbers slogging up Rainier's Emmons Glacier under a blistering summer sun, roped together, ice axes in hand, navigating crevasses and altitude headaches. Lone hikers gazing into the still waters of Crater Lake from a cliff edge, their breath catching at the sheer blue below. Backpackers filtering ice-cold water from melt-fed streams below South Sister, the air buzzing with mosquitoes and the smell of pumice and pine. Others trudged through the moonscape around Mount Saint Helens, still raw and gray in the years after the eruption, its silence eerie and unforgettable. While the 1990s passed without any catastrophic volcanic eruptions in the Pacific Northwest, a calm stretch by historical standards. But that relative quiet didn't mean the ground was still or the danger gone. The region hummed with subtle seismic activity, small quakes, swarms, and the occasional ominous tremor that served as a reminder of the vast volcanic forces sleeping beneath the surface. Even without a major eruption, the decade was anything but idle. It was a time of preparation, of vigilance without panic, of learning how to live with the volcanoes instead of pretending they weren't there. Scientists and public officials, aware that geological peace is always temporary in the Cascades, worked steadily to strengthen the region's defenses. Networks of seismometers were expanded and modernized, creating a more detailed picture of underground activity. Satellite-based monitoring systems began to offer new insights into ground deformation, subtle swelling or sinking that can hint at magma movement deep below. Emergency response agencies developed protocols, refined evacuation routes, and ran drills that imagined the worst-case scenarios. In Washington's Pierce County, authorities installed and tested lahar warning sirens that could save thousands in the event of a sudden mud flow from Mount Rainier. Oregon's Office of Emergency Management conducted scenario planning and community outreach to make sure residents living near the Three Sisters, Mount Hood, or Crater Lake knew the risks. In Northern California, geologists mapped the sprawling lava zones around Mount Shasta and Lassen Peak, identifying danger zones that could be swallowed by lava flows or buried under ash if the mountains ever awoke. This slow, methodical preparation was driven by a quiet but potent fear, a kind of inherited memory left behind by Mount Saint Helens. The 1980 eruption wasn't just a geological event. It was a trauma, a scar left on the landscape and in the minds of those who witnessed it. Entire forests flattened, rivers choked with mud, lives lost in minutes. That eruption reshaped the way the country thought about volcanoes. Suddenly, they weren't exotic threats confined to Hawaii or faraway lands. They were here, in America's backyard, and the knowledge that any one of these snow-capped peaks, Rainier, Hood, Shasta, even Glacier Peak, could erupt with little warning kept people alert, if not entirely afraid. It was the kind of awareness that lurks in the background, rarely spoken, but deeply felt. Beyond the science and the risk, though, the Cascade Mountains have always been more than just potential disaster zones. They are cultural landmarks, emotional landscapes, and creative fuel for generations. Over the decades, the Cascades have stirred the minds of poets who try to put their quiet power into words. Park rangers who spend seasons learning their trails and teaching others, painters who chase their changing light, and punks who find something raw and untamed in the jagged skylines. These mountains have loomed large in road trip photos, served as the setting for personal epiphanies, and provided a backdrop for protests and spiritual journeys. People have gone into them to prove something, to escape something, or to find something they couldn't name. They've pushed climbers to their limits, forcing them to confront fear and altitude in equal measure. They've given city dwellers space to breathe, places to hike or ski or just stare into the fog until the noise of modern life fades. The wilderness of the Cascades offers shelter, not just to humans seeking refuge, but to entire ecosystems. Bears, elk, cougars, marmots, eagles, butterflies, and frogs all live in the shadow of the peaks. Even when the mountains seem asleep, Life pulses through every tree, every stream, every slope carved by glaciers or fire. Ecologically, they're among the richest environments on the continent. These mountains host ancient forests that trap carbon and clean the air. They feed watersheds that supply cities and farms. Their volcanic soils nurture orchards, vineyards, and wildflower-covered slopes. As climate change reshapes the world, the Cascades are changing too. Glaciers are retreating, snowpacks are shrinking, and ecosystems are shifting. But they still offer resilience, biodiversity, and a crucial buffer against environmental collapse. They're not just scenic, they're vital. And yet, for all their beauty and their benefits, the Cascade Mountains remain deeply unpredictable. Their silence is not peace, it is potential. Born of fire, shaped by ice, and filled with a constant geological tension, they sit quietly until they don't. But that's part of what gives them their power. They're reminders that not everything can be controlled or predicted, that some parts of nature still write their own rules. Despite all the science, all the satellites and sirens and drills, the mountains hold the final say. They are stubborn in their presence, serene in their moments of stillness, and savage when they choose to speak. They remain, as ever, stitched into the evolving story of the American West, looming, magnificent, and utterly unignorable.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 1 on X, we're here just for you, for you.